In the remote wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, a relentless storm blankets the landscape in snow and silence. Beneath the surface of this natural beauty, however, a deadly game of survival is unfolding. The elite paramilitary organization known as Black Horizon has set its sights on these isolated lands for reasons shrouded in secrecy. Their leader, Gabriel Rourke, a man feared for his strategic brilliance, believes he holds absolute control. But Rourke is about to face a threat he never anticipated. A lone adversary who knows this land better than anyone. Alex Vargas, a former Special Forces operative with a haunted past, has returned to the place he once called home. Yet he is not the same man who left it behind. His mission is clear: dismantle Black Horizon's stranglehold before they can turn the valley into a fortress. With only his survival instincts, a loyal German shepherd named Kodiak, and his extensive training, Alex is determined to outmaneuver an enemy that thrives on fear and domination. But this isn't just a battle of strength. It's a war of strategy and willpower. Alex systematically disrupts Black Horizon's operations, planting fear and doubt in their ranks. The men who once thought themselves invincible now find themselves hunted. Every step they take brings them closer to a trap Alex has been preparing since the moment he set foot back on his homeland. As tensions rise, Gabriel Rourke and Alex Vargas clash in a deadly game of cat and mouse. Both men are warriors shaped by the battlefield, but only one understands the true stakes of this fight. What drove Alex to return? What is Black Horizon's real objective in this desolate region? And how far is Alex willing to go to protect the land he swore never to come back to? The snowstorm conceals more than just footprints. It hides secrets, betrayals, and a reckoning years in the making. As dawn approaches, one truth becomes inevitable. Only one side will walk away from this frozen battlefield. The question is, which one? The time for games is over. The hunt has begun. The highlands of Montana stretched endlessly, blanketed by the quiet stillness of early winter. Towering pines swayed gently in the cold wind, and a thin sheet of frost coated the rocky ground. From a ridge overlooking the valley, Alex Vargas crouched, his sharp gaze fixed on a narrow logging road winding through the forest below. His instincts were on high alert. Something wasn't right. For years, he had lived in relative isolation here, far from the bureaucracies and betrayals that had defined his life as a U.S. intelligence officer. His cabin, built with his own hands, was hidden deep within the forest, off the grid, untraceable. It had taken him years to disappear completely after that mission in Eastern Europe. The world believed he was dead, and he preferred it that way. But peace was a fragile thing. He had known it wouldn't last forever. Alex raised a pair of binoculars to his eyes, scanning the road. The faint sound of rotor blades hummed in the distance. He tightened his grip on the binoculars as a military-grade helicopter appeared, circling low over the tree line. A few minutes later, 3 trucks followed, moving slowly, their tires crunching over the frost. Each vehicle was heavily armored and escorted by armed men in tactical gear. Paramilitary, Alex muttered under his breath. They weren't locals, that much was certain. He had seen these kinds of convoys before, coordinated, professional, and methodical. Whoever they weren't here for sightseeing. Kodiak, his German shepherd, let out a low growl beside him. Alex reached down to calm the dog, scratching behind his ears. "I see it too, buddy," Alex whispered. The convoy halted at a fork in the road. Soldiers disembarked, moving with purpose. They fanned out into the forest, setting up checkpoints and patrolling the surrounding area. Alex lowered the binoculars and leaned back against a tree, his mind racing. He had heard rumors about groups like this, private military contractors and rogue syndicates, operating in remote regions. Some trafficked weapons, others smuggled high-value goods, and a few sought control of abandoned military installations. Whatever their mission was, it had just brought them into Alex's backyard. He couldn't let that stand. By the time Alex returned to his cabin, dusk had begun to settle over the valley. The fading sunlight cast long shadows across the clearing. Kodiak ran ahead, sniffing the perimeter, while Alex checked the hidden sensors buried near the tree-line. They were untouched for now. Inside the cabin, Alex flipped a hidden switch beneath his desk, activating a concealed communications array. An encrypted radio set flickered to life, emitting a soft, static hum. He hadn't used this system in years, but if anyone could provide intel on the convoy, it was his contact, Maya Trent. Maya was a former intelligence analyst who had gone off-grid after a whistleblowing incident. They had crossed paths years ago during a mission in the Balkans. Since then, she had become a key figure in the survivalist network that spanned remote regions like these. If anyone had eyes on unusual activity in Montana, it would be her. The radio crackled, and a familiar voice came through. "Alex? Is that you?" "It's me," Alex replied. "We've got a problem. I just saw a convoy, paramilitary, heavily armed, moving through the Southern Valley. You know anything about that?" There was a pause on the other end. When Maya spoke again, her tone was serious. "Yeah, I've been hearing chatter about a group calling themselves Black Horizon. They've been making moves across the Northwest, but no one knows exactly what they're after. What's their objective near your area?" "That's what I need to find out," Alex said. "They set up checkpoints near the old logging road. Looks like they're preparing for a long-term operation. Could be connected to that Cold War bunker," Maya suggested. "You know the one hidden near Granite Peak? There were rumors back in the day about experimental tech being stored there, classified weapon systems." Alex frowned. He had explored parts of the old military installation years ago. Most of the equipment had been dismantled, or so he had thought. But if Black Horizon was after something buried in those tunnels, it might explain their presence. "Let's assume they're after the bunker," Alex said. "That gives us a tactical advantage. I know the terrain better than they do." Maya hesitated. "Alex, these guys aren't amateurs. If you go up against them alone—" "I'm not going in blind," Alex interrupted. "I'll start with recon. Just keep your ears open and let me know if you pick up anything else." "Copy that. And Alex, be careful." The transmission cut off, leaving Alex alone with his thoughts. He stared at the radio for a moment before shutting it down. Maya was right. This wasn't going to be a simple operation, but he had faced worse odds before. He gathered his gear, a rifle, a set of field knives, and a small surveillance drone. Every movement was precise, practiced. His instincts had dulled over the years, but now they were coming back like old friends. Kodiak padded over, his eyes alert and watchful. Alex knelt beside the dog, checking his harness. "Looks like we're going back to work," he said softly. The dog wagged his tail once, ready for the mission ahead. Night fell as Alex made his way back toward the ridge. He moved silently through the dense forest, his senses heightened. The convoy's campfires flickered in the distance, casting eerie shadows across the trees. He deployed the drone, sending it high above the treetops to get a better view. Through the drone's camera feed, he saw the layout of the enemy encampment. They had set up a perimeter with guard posts and sensor arrays. Patrols moved in coordinated patterns, their routes overlapping just enough to prevent easy infiltration. Whoever was commanding this operation knew how to secure a site. But Alex wasn't looking for an easy path in. He was looking for patterns, weaknesses, and opportunities. He spotted what he needed: a gap near the eastern ridge where the patrols were thin. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to get closer without drawing attention. "Let's move," Alex whispered to Kodiak. They slipped into the shadows, the cold wind howling softly through the trees. The hunt had begun. The early morning air was sharp and biting, each breath forming clouds of frost as Alex crouched near the tree line overlooking the encampment. Dawn was breaking over the valley, casting long, golden streaks of light across the snow-dusted ground. The enemy's camp below remained active despite the early hour. Soldiers moved in tight formations, their radios crackling with orders as they fortified their perimeter. The whole scene reminded Alex of countless operations he'd run in his past life, except this time, he wasn't the one giving the orders. Alex adjusted the controls of his surveillance drone. The live feed displayed a clear view of the camp layout. There were two main sectors, a central command area with temporary structures, and a secondary logistics zone where trucks offloaded supplies. Patrols moved in predictable routes, with overlapping watch zones designed to limit blind spots. It was a solid defensive strategy, but Alex had seen better. Through the drone's camera, he spotted something significant: a row of crates being unloaded near one of the trucks. Several soldiers stood guard as others inspected the cargo. The crates were stenciled with a symbol Alex hadn't seen in years, an insignia used by a now-defunct Black Ops division of the U.S. military. His jaw tightened. Whatever was in those crates, it wasn't something the Syndicate had acquired legally. They're gearing up for something big, Alex murmured to himself. Kodiak, crouched beside him, gave a low growl. His ears perked forward. Alex followed the dog's gaze and saw a patrol approaching from the east. The soldiers moved with discipline, their boots crunching softly in the snow. He could see the tension in their posture. They were alert but unaware they were being watched. Alex signaled to Kodiak to stay low as the patrol passed. He didn't move until the soldiers disappeared beyond the next ridge. Timing would be crucial now. He needed to gather more intel but couldn't risk being spotted. Slipping back into the cover of the trees, Alex navigated through the forest, his boots leaving almost no trace on the frozen ground. He made his way toward a vantage point overlooking the logistics zone. From here, he could see the main entrance to the camp, where large supply trucks were parked under camouflage netting. Armed guards patrolled the area, their breath visible in the cold air. Alex activated his encrypted comlink. "Maya, you copy?" After a moment of static, Maya's voice came through, slightly distorted but clear enough. "I'm here. What's the situation?" "They've got something big in those crates. Looks like old Black Ops equipment. They're securing the site like they're planning a long-term occupation. Any updates on Black Horizon's movements?" "Yeah," Maya replied, her tone serious. "I intercepted some encrypted transmissions last night. They're not just here to control the area. They're after an asset hidden in the Cold War bunker. Word is, it's a prototype weapon system left behind when the facility was decommissioned. Whatever it is, they think it'll give them leverage in the arms trade." Alex frowned. "That lines up with what I'm seeing. They're running full-scale logistics like they're prepping for a larger operation. We can't let them get too comfortable." "What's the plan?" Maya asked. "First, I disrupt their supply lines, cut off their resources, and slow their momentum. If they're stretched thin, they'll start making mistakes." Maya hesitated before responding. "Be careful, Alex. These guys aren't playing around. If Rourke's in command, he'll be expecting retaliation." "Good," Alex said, his voice cold. "I'll give him more than he bargained for." The transmission ended, leaving Alex alone with the sounds of the forest. He surveyed the camp one last time before retreating to his staging area. He had hours of preparation ahead of him. As night fell, Alex moved silently through the forest, his presence masked by the shadows and the howling wind. He carried a backpack loaded with explosives and electronic sabotage devices. Kodiak followed closely, his senses heightened. The camp was quieter now, but still under heavy guard. Searchlights swept across the perimeter, their beams slicing through the darkness. Alex observed the rotation schedule. Each sweep lasted precisely 30 seconds before the lights moved to the next sector. He'd have to time his movements perfectly. His first target was the fuel depot near the logistics zone. Without fuel, their trucks and generators would be crippled, forcing them to rely on limited reserves. He crept along the tree line until he reached a drainage ditch that ran parallel to the camp's fence. Flattening himself against the frozen ground, he crawled forward, keeping out of sight of the patrols. At the edge of the depot, Alex paused to assess the situation. Two guards stood near the fuel tanks, their rifles slung lazily over their shoulders. They were relaxed, likely under the assumption that no one could infiltrate this deep into their territory. Alex smirked. That complacency would be their downfall. He set a timed explosive on one of the main fuel lines, ensuring that the blast would trigger after he was clear of the area. He slipped away just as a patrol passed by, oblivious to the sabotage taking place under their noses. Next, he targeted the communications array near the command post. This would be trickier. The array was heavily guarded, with a nearby observation tower providing overwatch. Alex would need a distraction. He pulled out a small device from his pack, a remote noise generator. He activated it and threw it toward the far side of the camp. Within seconds, a sharp, mechanical beeping echoed through the forest. The guards tensed, barking orders as they moved to investigate the noise. With the tower temporarily unmanned, Alex climbed the fence and made his way to the array. He worked quickly, disabling the transmitter and planting a second set of explosives. The entire system would go offline in a matter of minutes. By the time the guards realized they had been deceived, Alex was already gone. The first explosion shattered the night silence, a fiery plume erupting from the fuel depot. Soldiers scrambled in all directions, shouting orders as chaos spread through the camp. Moments later, the communications array went dark, cutting off their ability to coordinate a response. Alex watched from a nearby ridge, his expression unreadable. This was just the beginning. He had sent a message loud and clear. The mountain was his territory, and Black Horizon was no longer in control. Kodiak barked softly, his ears twitching at the distant sounds of confusion. Alex reached down and patted the dog's head. "Good work," he whispered. The camp below burned, the fires illuminating the snow-covered valley in an eerie glow. Alex knew this would force Rourke to escalate his tactics, but that was exactly what he wanted. The more desperate the enemy became, the more mistakes they would make. And Alex would be waiting. The cold mountain wind swept through the valley, carrying the distant echoes of crackling flames and shouted orders. From his vantage point deep in the forest, Alex watched through binoculars as Black Horizon scrambled to regain control of their shattered operation. Soldiers rushed between damaged vehicles, some dragging hoses to douse the fire at the fuel depot, while others worked frantically to repair the disabled communications array. The entire camp was in disarray, but chaos wouldn't last forever. Alex knew from experience that men like Gabriel Rourke thrived under pressure. The leader of Black Horizon would already be planning his response. Alex adjusted the focus on his binoculars and caught a glimpse of Rourke stepping out of the command tent. He was a tall, imposing figure dressed in tactical gear that looked both practical and intimidating. Even from a distance, Alex could see the calm fury in his posture. Rourke barked orders to his lieutenants, pointing toward different sections of the camp. Within minutes, soldiers regrouped, their movements more coordinated. The disarray was already being brought under control. "Fast recovery," Alex muttered to himself. He lowered the binoculars and leaned back against a tree. It wouldn't be long before Rourke retaliated. The next moves would determine the pace of this conflict, and Alex had no intention of giving up the initiative. Kodiak shifted beside him, sensing the rising tension. Alex patted the dog's side gently. "Let's head out," he whispered. By the time Alex returned to his cabin, it was near dawn. The sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of morning, casting a pale glow over the surrounding forest. Despite his exhaustion, Alex moved with caution, scanning the area for any signs of enemy activity. It was unlikely they had tracked him this far, but Rourke wasn't someone who would take chances. Inside the cabin, Alex secured the doors and windows before activating his encrypted radio. He needed an update from Maya before making his next move. The radio crackled to life after a few moments. "Alex? You there?" Maya's voice came through, sounding slightly distorted. "Yeah, I'm here," Alex replied. "What's the latest?" "You definitely rattled the hornet's nest," Maya said. "Intercepted some chatter on their emergency frequencies." Rourke's pissed. He's blaming his lieutenants for the security breach, but he's also putting together a strike force to hunt you down. "Figures," Alex said grimly. "Any intel on their movements?" "They've set up a temporary command post about 3 miles southeast of your position," Maya explained. "It looks like they're deploying recon teams to scout the surrounding area. They're probably trying to triangulate your location based on the sabotage sites." Alex nodded to himself. It was a textbook response. Send out multiple patrols to search for the enemy, then use triangulation to narrow down potential hiding spots. Rourke was moving quickly, trying to regain control of the situation. "I need you to keep monitoring their comms," Alex said. "If they start closing in, I want to know." "Copy that," Maya responded. "And Alex, Rourke isn't just some mercenary. He's ex-special forces, same as you. He knows how to think like a hunter." "Good," Alex said, his voice cold. "So do I." Later that afternoon, Alex scouted the area around the southeastern command post. He moved cautiously through the dense forest, keeping his profile low. The sun hung high overhead, casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground. Every step was calculated to avoid leaving tracks. Through the trees, he spotted a patrol moving in a tight formation. 4 men in tactical gear swept the forest with their weapons at the ready. They moved efficiently, checking every possible hiding spot along their path. Alex watched silently from a concealed position, noting their patterns. They weren't amateurs, but they were moving too predictably, following a straight path along a ridge without varying their formation. Amateurs learned fast under someone like Rourke, Alex thought. He had to strike before they adapted. He waited until the patrol reached a narrow choke point between 2 large rock formations. Then, with a swift motion, Alex pulled a small remote from his pack and triggered one of the noise generators he had planted earlier. A high-pitched beeping echoed through the forest, startling the patrol. "Sound to the east," one of the soldiers shouted. The group shifted their focus toward the noise, weapons raised. They fanned out, moving cautiously toward the source of the disturbance. Alex moved quickly, circling behind them with silent precision. He approached the rear guard, who had momentarily lowered his weapon to check his radio. Alex struck with brutal efficiency, delivering a chokehold that rendered the soldier unconscious within seconds. He dragged the body behind a tree and disabled the man's radio before slipping away into the shadows. The remaining soldiers, unaware of their comrade's absence, continued their search for the phantom noise. Alex observed them from a higher vantage point, calculating his next move. He could take them out one by one, but that would reveal his presence too soon. Instead, he opted for psychological pressure. He activated a second noise generator, this time on the opposite side of the ridge. The beeping intensified, disorienting the patrol. The soldiers began arguing over which direction to move. "Damn it, regroup," their leader barked. "We're being played." "Exactly," Alex thought with a smirk. He left them to their confusion and melted back into the forest. Back at the command post, Gabriel Rourke stood in front of a tactical map, his jaw clenched in frustration. Reports from the patrols were coming in sporadically. Phantom noises, lost signals, and disappearing soldiers. It was as if the forest itself was working against them. "He's out there," Rourke muttered. "He's turning the terrain into a weapon." Dante Cruz, one of his top lieutenants, approached with a grim expression. "One of our patrols hasn't reported back. We found tracks leading east, but they vanished near a rock formation." "Vargas," Rourke said quietly. "This is his signature. Isolate, disorient, and dismantle." "What are your orders?" Dante asked. Rourke stared at the map for a long moment. He could feel the balance of power shifting. Vargas was controlling the pace of the conflict, forcing Black Horizon to react instead of act. That had to change. "Pull the patrols back," Rourke ordered. "We're not going to play his game anymore. Set up ambush points along the main trails. He wants us to keep chasing phantoms. Let's make him chase us instead." "Yes, sir," Dante replied. As his lieutenant left to carry out the orders, Rourke stepped outside the command post. He looked toward the distant ridge where the last patrol had vanished. "I'll find you, Vargas," he whispered. "And when I do, you won't have anywhere left to run." Alex, hidden among the trees, watched the command post from a distance. He could see the shift in strategy as patrols began consolidating around key trails. Rourke was adapting faster than expected, which meant the game was entering a new phase. "Good," Alex thought. "Let's see how far you're willing to go." The storm brewing between them was far from over. The temperature dropped sharply as evening fell over the mountains. The forest became an expanse of endless shadows, each tree swaying like a phantom under the howling wind. Alex moved silently along a ridgeline, his senses sharp and his mind calculating. The enemy had shifted their tactics. Patrols were no longer blindly searching for him. Instead, they had fortified key access points, laying down traps and ambushes to bait him into making a mistake. From his hidden position, Alex watched the movements of Black Horizon soldiers. They were methodical now, sweeping the surrounding trails with overlapping fire zones. Tripwires, concealed in the underbrush, lined the main paths. They were setting up to box him in. Rourke was tightening the noose. Alex sighed softly. It was the natural evolution of the hunt, predators adapting to the behavior of their prey. The problem for Rourke was that Alex had never been prey. The cold interior of the cabin seemed even more isolating that night. The low fire in the stone hearth cast flickering shadows on the walls as Alex stared at a map spread across the table. His mind worked through the enemy's positioning. Black Horizon had control of all the main routes, but they didn't yet understand the terrain's full complexity. Kodiak lay by the fire, occasionally lifting his head to listen to the sounds of the forest outside. He too could sense the change in atmosphere. Alex glanced at the radio. He hesitated for a moment, then activated the encrypted channel. "Maya, you there?" After a moment, Maya's voice crackled through. "Yeah, I'm here. You okay?" "Still breathing," Alex replied. "Rourke's shifting tactics. He's locking down the trails and trying to force me into a confrontation on his terms. Figures. I've been monitoring their communications. They're doubling patrol strength in the surrounding area. Seems like Rourke doesn't want any surprises after what you pulled at the fuel depot." "Good," Alex said. "Let him consolidate. The more men he keeps clustered together, the less reach he'll have across the terrain." "Just be careful," Maya warned. "If they corner you, they'll hit hard." Rourke's reputation isn't just for show. He's known for breaking his enemies by cutting off their options. Alex leaned forward, rubbing a hand across his face. He knew Maya was right. This wasn't just a tactical engagement anymore. It was a psychological war. Rourke would try to isolate him, make him feel trapped and desperate. "What about the locals?" Alex asked. "They're spooked," Maya replied. "Some of them have already packed up and moved deeper into the wilderness. The rest are hunkering down, waiting to see what happens next. You might be on your own for a while." "I've been on my own before," Alex said quietly. The line went silent for a moment before Maya spoke again. "Don't lose yourself out there, Alex. You've got people who care whether you make it out of this alive." Alex didn't respond immediately. He knew Maya meant well, but survival was the only priority right now. Everything else was just noise. "I'll check in when I can," he finally said. "Stay safe." "You too," Maya replied before the line went dead. Alex turned off the radio and stared at the fire for a long moment. The isolation was settling in, just as Rourke intended. The next morning, Alex began his counter-siege operations. He couldn't fight Rourke head-on, but he could keep Black Horizon off balance. His first target was one of the forward scouting posts near a narrow gorge. According to his reconnaissance, it was manned by 3 soldiers who rotated shifts every 6 hours. Alex made his approach just before dawn, moving under the cover of the early morning fog. He positioned himself on a rocky ledge above the post and waited. He could hear the faint murmur of conversation below as 2 soldiers huddled near a portable heater. The third was stationed farther down the trail, keeping watch. Alex reached for the suppressed rifle strapped to his back. He lined up his shot on the furthest soldier, aiming for the radio pack he carried. With a soft crack, the bullet severed the antenna, rendering the radio useless. The soldier scrambled to check the damaged equipment, giving Alex the window he needed to move. He descended the ledge in silence, approaching the remaining 2 guards. With swift, practiced movements, Alex incapacitated them using tranquilizer darts, a non-lethal solution designed to cause minimal noise. By the time the 3rd soldier realized what was happening, Alex had already disappeared into the fog. The scouting post was now disabled, cutting off one of Rourke's key observation points. Back at Black Horizon's command post, Gabriel Rourke stood before a digital map, his brow furrowed in frustration. Reports were coming in sporadically. Another patrol had gone silent, and the communications network was being disrupted in scattered areas. "He's dismantling us one piece at a time," Rourke muttered. Dante Cruz, his lieutenant, shook his head. "We underestimated how well he knows this terrain. He's not just hiding, he's hunting." Rourke exhaled slowly. He had dealt with insurgents and rogue operators before, but Vargas was proving more elusive than expected. This wasn't a fight they could win through brute force alone. "Shift the strategy," Rourke ordered. "Pull back non-essential patrols and focus on reinforcing our core positions. I want automated sensors deployed along the perimeter. If Vargas wants to keep playing these games, we'll turn this entire forest into a trap." "And if he keeps dismantling our forces?" Dante asked. "Then we push him," Rourke said, his eyes cold. "We isolate him completely. No supplies, no contact with his allies. We'll see how long he can last when he has nothing but the cold and his own thoughts for company. The days that followed were a relentless game of cat and mouse. Alex struck swiftly and retreated just as quickly, sabotaging supply lines and surveillance equipment. Each hit weakened Black Horizon's hold on the region, but Rourke's men adapted, fortifying their defenses and setting ambushes. Alex could feel the pressure mounting. Every move he made now was riskier than the last. He was running out of time and resources. On the fourth night of the siege, Alex found himself near the ruins of an old ranger station deep in the forest. He crouched inside the crumbling structure, catching his breath as Kodiak kept watch. His mind raced through potential strategies, searching for an opening he could exploit. The isolation was beginning to wear on him. He hadn't spoken to Maya in days, and the constant tension of the hunt was taking its toll. But he couldn't afford to falter. "They think they've got me cornered," Alex muttered to himself. "Let them believe that." He pulled out a small map of the area, marking key locations where Rourke's forces had concentrated their efforts. Patterns were beginning to emerge, patterns he could use. "Time to turn the tables," Alex whispered. Kodiak wagged his tail slightly, sensing his master's renewed determination. The siege was far from over, but Alex wasn't about to let the mountain become his prison. The next move would be his, and it would be devastating. Snow began to fall heavily over the forest as Alex moved through the underbrush. The world around him was blanketed in white, muffling sounds and obscuring visibility. It worked to his advantage. Black Horizon's patrols were struggling to adapt to the harsh terrain and worsening conditions. Their tracks were easily visible now, while Alex and Kodiak left almost no trace as they navigated through dense patches of pine. Alex's mind was razor-sharp despite the cold biting at his skin. Over the past few days, he had methodically dismantled the enemy's supply chain and surveillance networks. The soldiers were restless, and their cohesion was beginning to crack under the pressure of exhaustion and cold. Rourke was tightening his defensive perimeter, which meant one thing. He was preparing for a final confrontation. Alex welcomed it. Standing at the edge of a ridge overlooking the enemy camp, Alex crouched and studied the layout through binoculars. The site had been heavily reinforced since his last strike. Trenches were dug around the perimeter, and automated motion sensors were scattered throughout the surrounding area. Heavy weapons teams had set up firing positions at key points. "They're bracing for a full assault," Alex muttered to himself. Kodiak sniffed the air beside him, ears perked in alertness. Alex reached down to calm the dog, keeping his gaze on the camp below. The soldiers were organized, but the tension in their movements was clear. They were on edge. "Good," Alex whispered. "That's exactly where I want them." He had been carefully engineering their fear, using psychological warfare to create uncertainty. Tonight, he would push them even further. The camp was unusually quiet that night, with soldiers gathered in small groups near portable heaters. Their conversations were hushed, and their eyes frequently darted toward the surrounding trees, as if expecting the shadows to come alive. In the command tent, Rourke stood over a tactical map with Dante Cruz at his side. The tension between them was palpable. "He's playing us," Dante said, his voice low. "We keep reacting to him, and he's using it to wear us down." Rourke nodded slowly. "It's guerrilla warfare. He's forcing us into a war of attrition. But this ends soon. I've called in reinforcements from our northern division. We'll have the manpower to flush him out. Reinforcements won't matter if he keeps sabotaging our infrastructure," Dante warned. "Morale is already fragile." Rourke's eyes narrowed. He knew his lieutenant was right. The men were exhausted, and some were beginning to question their leadership. Vargas wasn't just a threat to their mission. He was dismantling their command structure from within. "Then we give them a reason to stay focused," Rourke said. "We'll tighten our perimeter even more and cut off every potential escape route. No more reactionary moves. Vargas will have no choice but to confront us on our terms. And if he doesn't? Then we hunt him like an animal," Rourke growled. "No more games." Alex watched from the trees as another patrol passed by, their movements sluggish and uncoordinated. The worsening snowstorm was taking its toll on them. He waited until they were out of sight before slipping through the perimeter. He had identified several weak points in their defenses, areas where the automated sensors were poorly calibrated due to the uneven terrain. He moved silently, bypassing tripwires and camera feeds with practiced ease. His destination was the logistics zone, where the remaining fuel and ammunition supplies were stored. Alex's plan was simple: cripple their ability to sustain the siege. Without resources, Rourke's soldiers would become desperate and demoralized. He reached the supply depot and scanned the area. 2 guards were stationed near a stack of fuel drums, their backs to him as they monitored the surrounding forest. Alex pulled a small remote detonator from his pack and activated a device he had planted earlier, a sonic disruption emitter. A sharp, high-pitched noise pierced the air, causing the guards to wince and cover their ears. In the confusion, Alex moved swiftly, placing charges on the fuel drums and nearby crates of ammunition. The entire process took less than a minute. As the guards tried to pinpoint the source of the sound, Alex slipped back into the shadows. He triggered the detonator once he was a safe distance away. The explosion lit up the night sky, a massive fireball erupting from the depot. The shockwave echoed through the forest, sending soldiers into a panic. Alex watched from a ridge as chaos unfolded below. "They're falling apart," Alex whispered. Kodiak barked softly in agreement. In the command tent, Rourke stumbled as the explosion rocked the ground beneath him. Alarms blared across the camp as soldiers rushed to contain the fire. Dante burst into the tent, his face pale with shock. "He hit the supply depot," Dante said breathlessly. "We've lost half our fuel and ammunition." "Damn it!" Rourke slammed his fist on the table. He had underestimated Vargas again. The man was systematically dismantling their operation, and each attack pushed them closer to collapse. "Pull everyone back to the command sector," Rourke ordered. "We're consolidating our forces. No one moves without my direct authorization." "We're running out of time," Dante warned. "If he keeps this up—" "I know," Rourke snapped. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "We hold this ground. Vargas wants to break us psychologically. We don't give him that satisfaction." But deep down, Rourke knew the truth. Vargas was already in their heads. Alex retreated deeper into the forest, his mind racing through the next steps of his plan. The siege was nearing its climax. Rourke's forces were fractured and demoralized, but the enemy commander was too dangerous to underestimate. He found a sheltered spot near an outcropping of rocks and set up a small observation post. From here, he could monitor the camp and assess the fallout from the explosion. Soldiers moved erratically, their movements lacking coordination. "They're close to breaking," Alex muttered, but he couldn't afford to become complacent. Rourke would be planning his next move, and it would likely involve a high-risk counterattack. Alex leaned against the rock, letting the cold air clear his thoughts. He had been fighting alone for so long that the idea of final victory seemed almost distant, something out of reach. But now, he could see the endgame forming. "They think they're the hunters," Alex whispered. "Time to show them the truth." He glanced down at Kodiak, who stood alert by his side. The dog's loyalty and sharp instincts had been crucial throughout this ordeal. Together, they had survived what most wouldn't. Alex checked his gear one last time. Tonight would be decisive. One way or another, the siege would end. The storm intensified, snow falling in thick, blinding sheets. But Alex felt no fear. He had faced worse storms before. And just like those times, he would emerge victorious. The blizzard showed no signs of letting up. Snow whirled in chaotic patterns, blanketing the forest and making visibility almost non-existent. The storm was Alex's ally now, masking his movements and giving him the perfect opportunity to lay the final groundwork for his plan. The enemy's sense of control was slipping, and Rourke would soon make a desperate move. Alex needed to be ready for it. Hidden among a dense thicket near the edge of Black Horizon's fortified sector, Alex crouched in silence, his eyes narrowing as he observed the soldiers struggling to maintain their patrol routes. Their flashlights cut beams of light through the storm, but the guards were clearly disoriented. The pressure of constant attacks and the freezing cold was wearing them down faster than Alex had anticipated. A faint crackle came from Alex's earpiece. He tapped it lightly and heard Maya's voice, muffled by the interference caused by the storm. "Alex, you copy?" "Loud and clear," he whispered. "Got intel for you." Rourke's mobilizing. He's pulling all his forces to the command sector. Looks like he's preparing for a final push to secure the area. Alex exhaled slowly. He's feeling cornered. This is his last stand. Exactly. But there's more, Maya continued. He's setting up an ambush along the southern ridge. He thinks you'll try to make a break for it in the storm. They're betting everything on catching you there. Alex smirked. Rourke had fallen for the bait. He had been deliberately misleading them with false tracks and noise diversions over the past few days, subtly guiding their attention toward the southern ridge. Let them prepare, Alex said coldly. By the time they realize their mistake, it'll be too late. Gabriel Rourke stood at the center of his command tent, his jaw clenched as he reviewed the latest reports. The storm had disrupted their communications, but his officers had relayed enough information to confirm his suspicions. Vargas was somewhere nearby, using the terrain and weather to mask his movements. Dante Cruz approached with a grim expression. The men are holding the southern ridge as ordered. They've got claymores and tripwires set along the main paths. If Vargas shows up, he won't get far. Good, Rourke muttered. But we're not taking any chances. I want every available soldier stationed along the perimeter. He's not slipping through this time. Dante hesitated. Sir, what if this is another diversion? We've been chasing ghosts since the first attack. Vargas is manipulating us. I know, Rourke said quietly, but desperation has a way of making even the best operatives reckless. He's running out of options. He'll have to move soon, and when he does, we'll be ready. Rourke's voice was calm, but deep down, he felt a growing sense of unease. Vargas wasn't like other opponents. He was methodical, always thinking several steps ahead. Rourke couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something, some critical element of the enemy's plan. Alex moved quickly through the snow-covered forest, using the storm as cover. His objective was clear: disable Black Horizon's command capabilities and force Rourke into a position where he could no longer dictate the battlefield. The key to achieving this lay in a network of portable generators powering their perimeter defenses and surveillance equipment. He reached the first generator site without incident. 2 guards stood nearby, huddled together for warmth. Their visibility was limited, and they were too focused on staying warm to notice Alex approaching from behind. With swift precision, he incapacitated them, tying them with zip cuffs and leaving them unconscious beneath the snow-covered underbrush. Alex rigged the generator with a timed explosive and moved on to the next target. One by one, he sabotaged the key nodes supporting the enemy's defenses. The storm masked the sound of the small detonations as each generator went offline. By the time Rourke realized what was happening, half the camp's surveillance grid would be blind. The explosions hit Rourke's command post like hammer blows. Alarms blared as soldiers scrambled to respond. Emergency lights flickered across the camp, casting eerie red glows on the snow-covered ground. Report, Rourke barked, stepping outside the tent. Multiple generators are down, one of his officers shouted over the noise. We've lost surveillance in the eastern sector. Damn it. Rourke clenched his fists. Vargas was dismantling them faster than they could react. The attack wasn't just a physical assault, it was psychological. The men were already on edge, and now panic was spreading like wildfire. Get those backup systems online, Rourke ordered, and tighten security around the command post. He's coming for us. Dante Cruz appeared beside him, his breath visible in the freezing air. This is bad, Gabriel. The storm's making it impossible to coordinate a response. If Vargas hits us now, he won't, Rourke interrupted. He's not a ghost. He's a man, and men bleed. But even as he spoke the words, Rourke couldn't shake the feeling that they were already losing control. Alex watched the camp descend into chaos from a concealed position on a nearby ridge. He could see the flickering emergency lights and the disorganized movements of the soldiers. The storm continued to rage, further disorienting them. They're cracking, Alex murmured. He activated his radio. Maya, status report. You've got them in a chokehold, Maya replied. They've lost surveillance in most sectors. Rourke's doubling down on securing the command post, but he's blind everywhere else. If you're going to finish this, now's the time. Alex nodded. Understood. He turned to Kodiak, who stood alert by his side. The dog's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "Let's end this," Alex whispered. Rourke paced inside the command tent, his mind racing through possible countermeasures. He knew Vargas would strike soon, but the storm was making it nearly impossible to predict where or when. Every move they made seemed to play directly into the enemy's hands. A sudden explosion rocked the camp, this one much closer than the others. Soldiers shouted in alarm as a secondary fire erupted near the central supply depot. "He's targeting our infrastructure," Dante said urgently. "We need to pull back and regroup." "No," Rourke growled. "We stand our ground. Vargas wants us to scatter. We won't give him that satisfaction." Another explosion shook the ground, cutting off their power entirely. The tent was plunged into darkness. For the first time in years, Rourke felt a flicker of fear. In the silence that followed, a voice echoed over their compromised radio frequency. "You wanted me, Rourke," Alex's voice came through, calm and cold. "I'm here. Let's finish this." Rourke's eyes narrowed. He grabbed his rifle and stepped outside into the storm, his breath fogging in the frigid air. The final confrontation had begun. Alex moved like a shadow through the blizzard, each step bringing him closer to the heart of the enemy's stronghold. He could hear the disorganized shouts of soldiers and the crackle of gunfire in the distance. Rourke's forces were scrambling to contain the chaos, but they were out of time. Alex reached the perimeter of the command post and crouched behind a barricade. He could see Rourke standing in the open, his weapon raised as he barked orders to his men. The two adversaries locked eyes for a brief moment across the storm-racked battlefield. Rourke's lips curled into a snarl. "Come and get me, Vargas." Alex took a deep breath, steadying his heartbeat. This was the moment he had been preparing for. Everything was in place. "It's over, Rourke," Alex whispered to himself. "You just don't know it yet." The trap had closed. The storm raged with unrelenting fury as Alex moved closer to the heart of the enemy camp. Snow whipped around him in blinding sheets, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The disorientation worked in his favor. Black Horizon's soldiers stumbled through the chaos, shouting to each other over the howling wind. Their formations were broken, and panic had begun to spread. Alex had spent days pushing them to this breaking point, dismantling their command structure piece by piece. Now, with Rourke and his remaining forces huddled near the command post, it was time to finish what he had started. Kodiak padded silently beside him, his sharp eyes scanning the terrain for any threats. They moved as one, slipping between trees and boulders as they approached the perimeter. Alex paused at a large snow-covered ridge overlooking the camp, taking in the sight of the disorganized soldiers below. At the center of it all stood Gabriel Rourke, rallying his men with shouted commands. He was a formidable presence even in the storm, his voice cutting through the chaos. But Alex could see the cracks forming. Rourke's control over the situation was slipping. "This is it," Alex muttered, pulling a thermal monocular from his pack to get a clearer view. The camp's defenses were failing. Motion sensors were offline, and most of the automated turrets had either been sabotaged or were buried in snow. A voice came through Alex's earpiece, Maya's voice, calm but urgent. "Alex, I've got an update. Black Horizon reinforcements are still hours away, but they've managed to establish partial comms with their northern outpost. Rourke doesn't have much left, but he's still holding out hope that backup will reach him." "They won't," Alex replied coldly. "Not in this storm. Just don't get cocky. Rourke's desperate, and desperate men are dangerous." Alex nodded to himself. Maya was right. Rourke wouldn't go down easily. He would fight to the bitter end. "I'll check in when it's over," Alex said before cutting the transmission. Rourke stood near the remains of the central command post, his eyes scanning the snow-covered landscape. The storm made it almost impossible to see more than a few yards ahead, but he knew Vargas was out there somewhere. The sabotage had been too precise, too calculated. Vargas had been controlling this engagement from the start, forcing Rourke into a defensive posture and bleeding his resources dry. "Sir, we've lost contact with the Eastern patrols," Dante Cruz reported, approaching with a grim expression. "Whatever Vargas is planning, he's moving in fast. Then we force him to show himself," Rourke said. He motioned to a group of soldiers nearby. "Pull everyone back to the command perimeter. Set up overlapping fire zones and prepare for close-quarters combat. If he wants to take us out, he'll have to do it face to face. Dante hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Understood. Rourke watched as his men scrambled to fortify their positions. Despite the fear in their eyes, they obeyed his orders. He had built a reputation on being unbreakable, and now he needed to embody that strength more than ever. But deep down, Rourke knew that Vargas was unlike any enemy he had faced before. This wasn't just a battle. It was a war of wills. The snowstorm reached its peak as Alex descended from the ridge, moving with deadly precision toward the command perimeter. He could hear the distant sound of gunfire as scattered skirmishes broke out in the surrounding sectors. Black Horizon was struggling to maintain control, their communication networks crippled by the storm and Alex's earlier sabotage. He approached a cluster of fortified barricades where soldiers had set up firing positions. Their weapons were trained on the tree line, but their focus was fractured. Alex slipped behind a snowbank and drew a flashbang grenade from his belt. He pulled the pin and lobbed the grenade toward the barricades. A blinding flash and deafening boom shattered the silence, throwing the soldiers into disarray. Before they could recover, Alex was upon them, striking with ruthless efficiency. He moved like a shadow, disabling their weapons and knocking them unconscious one by one. Within moments, the barricade was silent. Alex rearmed himself with one of their rifles and continued forward. The camp was now a battleground of confusion and fear. Soldiers fired blindly into the storm, their nerves frayed by the relentless attacks. Alex used the chaos to his advantage, slipping through the gaps in their defenses and taking out key positions with minimal effort. At the center of the camp, Rourke stood in the open, his rifle raised as he scanned the storm for any sign of movement. He could feel the walls closing in around him. "Vargas!" he shouted into the void. His voice echoed through the camp, carried by the wind. "Enough of these games. Face me." Alex emerged from the shadows, his silhouette barely visible through the swirling snow. He approached slowly, his weapon lowered but his posture tense. "You're in no position to make demands," Alex said coldly, his voice cutting through the storm like a blade. Rourke turned to face him fully, his eyes narrowing. "You think this is over? You think you've won?" Alex shook his head. "It's already over, Rourke. Your men are done. Your supply lines are gone. Reinforcements aren't coming. You've lost." Rourke clenched his jaw, his grip tightening on his rifle. "You don't know what you're dealing with. Black Horizon doesn't just vanish because one man thinks he can outmaneuver us." "No," Alex replied, taking a step closer. "But your empire crumbles when you rely on fear and control. You built this operation on the illusion of strength, and now that illusion is shattered." For a moment, neither man spoke. The storm raged around them, but the tension between them was palpable. Rourke suddenly raised his weapon and fired. Alex dove to the side, rolling behind a snowbank as bullets whizzed past him. The two men exchanged fire, each one moving with tactical precision. Alex knew he couldn't afford to let this drag on. Rourke was a skilled combatant, but he was also exhausted and out of options. Alex flanked him, using the terrain to his advantage. He fired a controlled burst that struck Rourke's weapon, knocking it from his hands.